In medieval times, there were no modern conveniences like turning up the heat on a chilly winter evening. Actually, you were lucky if the four walls of your crudely constructed home did not suffer from severe drought or damp when seasons changed to the harshest one in the northern hemisphere. Commoners living in the Middle Ages dealt with various threats like illness, starvation, and famine, though death from exposure to winter's worst weather was also a constant threat. So, how could you keep warm without central heating or furnaces? Also, how would you obtain food when crops could not be grown? In other words, what did households do to survive a medieval winter? With the beginning of the Little Ice Age around the start of the 14th century, winters became colder and more treacherous in Europe, particularly in the northern regions of the continent. When the medieval warm period ended in the latter years of the 13th century, mild winters of light snowfall became a thing of the past. Extreme cold weather became more frequent during the Little Ice Age. This made survival in one's shelter a battle to preserve household warmth. For commoners and peasants in medieval times, houses were constructed on earth mounds for warmth. The exterior structure was often made from wood or wattle, which was poles interwoven with reed or branches and usually covered with daub. There was no modern insulation to retain heat, so the elements would be felt within these structures, especially in times of severe cold. However, during construction, some households thickened walls by using clay or hay to help keep warmth inside. In addition, rooms were made much smaller than today to help conserve warmth. As for covering windows against the elements, most made do with paper, branches, and whatever else they could find. Those more fortunate had wooden shutters to help keep out chilling cold. Wealthy households used stone or similar durable materials to build their homes, as well as glass for window panes. Though these homes were still quite cold, with small comfort from the fact the wind could not come inside. To generate warmth inside these homes, a fire pit or hearth was centrally located for heating and cooking. Tables for eating and beds for sleeping were placed nearby for comfort. Smoke would be vented outside by a hole in the roof, though this created a smoky situation as well as allowing cold inside the home. Portable heaters, whether braziers filled with burning coals or pans on a stand, were also used, though this was a dangerous method to generate heat. Numerous home fires would result from using portable heat sources when left unattended, causing home destruction and death. Another inventive source for heat came from housing livestock inside adjacent rooms or areas. That is, if they were not already slaughtered to provide food. Their body heat would be greatly appreciated, even though the noise and smell would be minor inconveniences. Speaking of body heat, the clothing people wore was very important for retaining body warmth. Layering clothing certainly helped, as well as wearing linen or cloth undergarments beneath the outer layers, which usually consisted of heavy wool. Wool clothing made by women was vital to surviving the winter, and the labor to produce and spin the wool by housewives deserves mention. Care had to be taken with overexertion while wearing these layers during wintertime. If one perspired too much, they would take off the sweaty undergarments to dry while their body cooled down. Afterwards, they would dress again in the dried underclothing. Wealthier classes possessed fur-lined coats of ermine, sable, and squirrel, while commoners used rabbits or lambskins for similar effect. Though commoners needed to ensure they did not poach these animals, and that wearing their fur was not restricted by prevailing laws. On the coldest months, even outdoor accessories such as boots, scarves, gloves, and cloaks were worn indoors to deal with the lack of heat. Bricks or stones could be heated in a fire, then wrapped in cloth to help provide warmth during rest, as well as sleeping close together by sharing beds for natural warmth. Wealthier households used four-poster beds with curtains to keep warmth inside their sleeping area on winter nights. Living in medieval times meant agriculture was the primary means to support a household, though how could you grow food in the bleak winter months? This is why food preparation and storing enough provisions for winter, like firewood, was never far from a household's mind, whether farmer or nobleman. If food and other necessities did not last to late winter or early spring, your chances of starvation increased dramatically. Facing that unfortunate situation, if there was no charity from neighbors or a local noble, you were living in certain danger. When it came to nourishment, autumn food harvests were preserved to eat during the winter season. Harvests were gathered before Michaelmas in late September. Grains and cereals would be dried and sorted, then stored in clay or ceramic pots for pottages and stews. Bread, a staple of all classes of households in medieval times, would require these grains as well as ale. Fruit would be dried or sealed in honey to prepare for winter. White meats, the term used for dairy products like milk by medieval peasants, would be provided by chickens, cows, and goats. Those that were fortunate to have slaughtered meats preserved this nourishment for winter. Meat would be placed in a wet brine, which was a mixture of water boiled in salt and herbs. Then this meat would be put in a new barrel of dry salt for final preservation. When it was needed during the winter season, it would be rinsed and used for cooking. Smoking meats would also be a common preservation method. Smoked and dried meats like beef and ham could last quite a while over the winter season. In the Middle Ages, winter was related to old age, death, and poverty. This association came about because of the natural processes which occurred during wintertime. The hard possibilities of this season included heavy snowfall and massive snowdrifts that could trap people in homes and blanket whole towns and cities. If the snowfall was heavy enough, houses would collapse on their occupants due to the weight overhead, making homes a tomb for their occupants. Nevertheless, even during medieval winter, life was not all about struggle. With the end of grueling long hours of outdoor labor, more time was available while staying indoors for entertainment. Outside, winter evenings were long and dark, making boredom near unbearable at times. Therefore, storytelling, doing crafts like wool spinning, and playing board games like chess or dice games were some activities used to occupy people's time. If one did venture outside, early skating with polished horse shin bones or wood, snowball fights, and sledding were common activities. For the wealthy, a popular outdoor activity was hunting for wild boar, which combined sport and the prospects of capturing food for the season. Unfortunately, with realities of lower temperatures, the risk of illnesses like pneumonia increased dramatically inside these cramped living quarters. To lessen the severity or possibility of illness, hot meals like soup and pottage helped to keep people warm. Limiting one's time outdoors was a practical way to lessen the effects of winter weather. Medicinal herbs were also picked from monastic gardens to prepare for the threat of illness in winter. For instance, hyssop, a plant which was harvested in fall for medicinal purposes, was used to treat phlegm, bronchitis, coughing, and similar conditions. Today, people enjoy many winter activities when snowfall comes, though having food and necessities at our disposal has made wintertime pleasurable compared to the Middle Ages, when this season was truly a time for survival. In general, Northern Europe was better able to cope with a harsh winter than their southern counterparts due to their experience and equipment. Though looking back to the effort required to survive a medieval winter, one cannot help but admire their courage, labor, and dedication. You look with a pleased smile outside a warm heated home to a winter wonderland of heavy snowfall created last evening. Though if you lived in medieval England during the winter season in the 1430s, your circumstances and thoughts would be very different. In fact, you'd be worried with each passing hour about not becoming the next victim of England's coldest decade of medieval winter. In the last 1,000 years of English winter, no decade has been colder than the 1430s. These frigid 10 seasons in medieval England occurred during the Little Ice Age, which began in the early 14th century. 10 years of bone-chilling winter at a time of no modern heating made your prospects for survival very bleak. In addition, during this horrific decade of wintertime freeze, people had to survive with a lack of food brought on by miserable fall harvests. When food was available, the prices were very expensive. Never truer was the Middle English saying, "Winter all eats that summer begets." According to research conducted in Bern, Switzerland by Dr. Chantal Kamenisch, along with Dr. Katrin Keller and other researchers, this decade of winter was a bitter catastrophe for Europe. Using data from climate archives, examining tree rings, ice cores, and historical documents, this team reconstructed a climate model of the 1430s period. Their detailed study, contained in the journal Climate of the Past, showed that deep winter chills often lasted until the months of April and May, a time usually associated with much warmer weather. This delayed the planting season and normal cycle of food production in medieval Europe. In fact, of the 10 harvests in Britain during that decade, it is estimated that 6 were very poor. This deep freeze of the 1430s also caused problems for farm animals, with England's vital wool trade suffering a 30% drop in the sheep population alone. These icy conditions also brought death to other types of important livestock required by peasants and the upper classes for sustenance. The specific cause for this bitter decade of winter was not identified, though historian Dr. Chantal Kamenisch at the University of Bern noted that natural climate variation factors appear to have created these extreme conditions. Her team's detailed research found that the decade of the 1430s experienced cold, icy winters on a scale not seen in the last 1,000 years in Europe. Even traditionally warmer regions like the south of France experienced winters often lasting until May, with frost devastating production of grain and other crops. During this period, the vast majority of people were peasants, with over 80% of them earning their living from agricultural pursuits. Therefore, the effects of these harsh winters of the 1430s were unimaginable for daily survival. In addition, one of the worst economic crises in British history was unfolding at the same time with the Great Slump of the 1430s to 1480s. Here, a shortage of silver and collapse in trade led to a decrease in the value of coins, causing a credit contraction in an economic downturn which took decades to recover from. During the winter of 1433, it was so cold in Scotland that fires were used to unthaw the contents of wine bottles. In November 1434, the River Thames was frozen between the locations of London Bridge and Gravesend, Kent. By the mid-1430s, English peasants suffered further from a lack of wheat for making their food staple of bread. When grain was available, it was very expensive to buy, so people resorted to other means for making their bread, even using the roots of ferns. After enduring the ravages of the Black Death and millions of deaths, people had become accustomed to a sufficient supply of food for a reduced population. This meant a general lack of preparedness for when the food shortages arrived on the continent. These icy weather conditions slowed trade across Europe, further inhibiting the supply of food. To combat the cold itself, various methods were used if and when available. In rural areas, livestock were brought indoors as a heat source. There were no glass window panes for peasants, so wood, branches, paper, or whatever other material was available was used to close open windows. Fires were left to burn in the center of rooms, and stones heated in these fires were wrapped in cloth and brought into beds for warmth. Otherwise, death from exposure would be your fate in the coldest decade of winter in medieval England. The resulting famine from this brutal decade of medieval English winter is assumed to have been most severe between 1438 to 1440, especially in the northern regions. The English crown banned grain exports by English and Dutch traders in 1438 to conserve what grain was available. The winter of 1438 in particular was very bitter, with records indicating the deaths of thousands of people. Weakened by malnutrition, famine, and poor living conditions, many fell prey to the various diseases ravaging England and Europe. Such harsh weather only confirmed the Middle Ages' belief that winter was related to death and poverty. The spread of epidemics and respiratory diseases during this period in various parts of Europe made each day a horrific experience. In London, they attempted to stop the ravages of famine by establishing communal granaries. The city also had written accounts of sage and thyme crops destroyed by abnormally late frosts in a shortened growing season. Furthermore, a severe shortage of fuels such as firewood and coal made these icy conditions almost unbearable all over England. This frigid weather of the 1430s also increased mortality rates. Diseases are often thought to be the primary cause of death during sustenance crises due to the weakened immune systems from malnutrition. Though with limited data available on diseases during this period, one can only discover that the lowest European population levels of the 15th century occurred during this harsh decade. However, a suggestion to gain further information on these winter mortalities was provided by Dr. Tim Newfield, an environmental historian at Georgetown University. He theorizes if cemeteries used at that time were discovered, examining skeletons could shed further light on how climate-related diseases played a role in these deaths. Today, we know it was a life-or-death struggle to survive in the medieval ages. In modern times, having food and necessities at our convenience makes wintertime much more pleasurable. However, even though we do not face the brutalities of those medieval winters of 1430s England, there is cause for concern. Although we have a warmer world compared to the 15th century, these researchers state that climate extremes are on the hotter end of the scale. This, of course, presents major challenges for drought, water supply, and food shortages from unsustainable growing conditions. Therefore, the consequences of the worst decade in 1,000 years for English winters can still be our reality today. In modern times, Christmas is a major celebration of merriment and good company. The one thing it shares with medieval times is lots of good eating. Food was an important part of a medieval Christmas, though the season was quite different compared to current celebrations. As the holiday season comes near, we thought that remembering Christmas feasts in medieval England for the peasant class would get your appetites ready. For those of you that admired the medieval upper classes and nobility, the next episode in this series will explore their bountiful Christmas feasts. Now then, bring your appetite to learn and enjoy medieval English peasant Christmas food. The word Christus Mass, or the Mass of Christ, were discovered in an Anglo-Saxon book dating from 1038 AD. However, this festive occasion has origins much earlier. For centuries, this time was used as a period for a special Mass, silent prayer, and reflection. Then, in medieval times, Christmas established itself as a prominent English religious celebration, heralding the beginning of the 12 days of Christmas. Christmas food for peasants from the lords of manors. Oftentimes, peasants laboring for a lord would receive additional food for Christmas as a kind of treat, like loaves of bread, meat dishes, or cheeses. If the nobleman was even more generous, leftover venison from their lavish feasts, such as deer, would be distributed to poor tenants. Naturally, not the best portions, though parts like the heart, liver, feet, and ears, known as umbles. Peasants would then use these ingredients and anything tasty they had on hand to make a pie. Now you know where the term "eat humble pie" originated. Uneaten pastries from the pies at rich feasts and other leftovers were often distributed to peasants, who waited at the gates of manors or castles in hopeful expectation. At some manor homes in rural areas, it was expected practice for the lords of the land to give 12 days off from labor for their peasant tenants. In addition, a special Christmas meal at their manor homes or castles would be offered to a certain number of them. According to information from the period, this feast would include pastries, sausages, and black pudding, then courses of fish, fowl, and roasted meats. To finish off this holiday meal, a course of tarts, custards, and sweetmeats would be provided, along with drink. However, in many instances, peasants would have to bring their own plates and firewood to this special occasion. Peasant Christmas dinners. The decadence of festive celebrations depended upon a household's status. Though for all classes of medieval English society, Christmas was a major event. Even peasant families with limited means tried to provide greater portions of food and drink to celebrate the Christmas season. Peasants formed the vast majority of people in medieval times, and agriculture kept many of them alive. If the harvest was good, a large Christmas feast would be enjoyed. In addition to a good harvest, those animals that could not be kept for the next season would be slaughtered and added to the bounty for this holiday season and long winter. Peasants in medieval England did not have grand feasts like manor homes and castles, though the majority of families tried to have at least a slaughtered pig salted and smoked for Christmas hams, sausages, and bacon. This would also happen because many poor families did not have enough grain to feed both themselves and all their farm animals during winter season. Goose was a popular meat for the medieval English Christmas dinner. At some churches, peasants were able to purchase some of this delicious meat when they offered a cooked goose for sale. Though at the price of 7 pence, it was an expensive meal, equivalent to a day's wages. Salted fish and lamb were also eaten when affordable. Peas, beans, onions, leeks, and garlic would often accompany these dishes if available for the peasant household. Of course, the staples of bread and cheese would also be on offer. Peasant Christmas desserts. In Middle Ages England, mince pies were quite popular and also an old tradition of the midwinter season. They were baked and filled with various types of leftover shredded meat like goose, chicken, or beef. The use of meats in these pies was discontinued around the 1800s. In addition, they included fruits and expensive spices like cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg. Medieval mince pies were formed in small rectangular shapes to symbolize the crib of baby Jesus, with those particular spices representing gifts of the 3 wise men. It was considered to bring good luck if a person ate 1 mince pie on each of the 12 days of the Christmas season. Also, medieval English people thought that to make a wish with your first bite meant it would come true, though to refuse a first offer of mince pie during Christmas could bring bad luck. Christmas puddings, known as fermenti or figgy pudding, were a medieval peasant Christmas treat. It consisted of a thick grain porridge to which one added currant, dry fruit, and eggs. If it could be afforded, spices like cinnamon or nutmeg were added. Before serving, fermenti had to cool and set. Other dessert choices for a medieval peasant Christmas meal included custards, tarts, dried apples, and honey. Peasant Christmas drinks. Of course, after all of this feasting, English peasants needed drinks to consume. Ale was the most common Christmas drink for medieval English peasants. According to where you lived, ingredients, and strength, it had a variety of tastes. In addition, a stronger brew known as church ale was also on offer. It was sold in the churchyard or inside the local church only at Christmas time. Wassail, which means in good health, was a popular consumed beverage at Christmas. It consisted of a hot malt cider or ale with spices like cinnamon or nutmeg added to it. Some of these earliest versions of this punch were called lamb's wool. It consisted of roasted crab apples put into hot mead. Today, the Christmas season is a time of gift-giving, great food, and merriment. During medieval times in England, the 12 days of Christmas lasted longer than 1 or 2 days. It was also a time for celebrating the fact your household survived the constant threat of hunger, with bounty available for the Christmas season. Regardless of social status, each household did its best to celebrate the occasion. Christmas was a time of year when showing goodwill to other people was at its highest. This is the lesson of a medieval English peasant Christmas feast that we should continue to remember for years to come. Yes, the Christmas season is coming closer, with its festive celebrations, homecomings, and happy holiday memories. Along with these cherished moments, how can we forget all the great food we will be eating? Food was also an important part of a medieval Christmas, though the season was quite different compared to modern celebrations. Medieval English Christmas began well before dawn, with a full 12 days of holidays to follow. During this time, eating, drinking, playing, and attending Mass were common activities, though gift-giving was not as prominent as today. At this time, we thought remembering Christmas feasts in medieval England for royalty and nobility would get your appetites ready. For those of you that admired how English peasants celebrated with Christmas food, watch our previous episode, with a link provided in the description. Now then, a rich household's medieval English Christmas food. Christmas food of medieval English royalty. How can anyone today imagine the unbelievable Christmas food of medieval English royalty? Well, honorable mentions go to the following kings. In the year 1213 AD, King John of England hosted a Christmas feast which, according to royal administrative records of the time, showed he spared no expense. On one order alone, he purchased 24 hogsheads of wine, 200 heads of pork, 1,000 hens, 50 pounds of pepper, 2 pounds of very expensive saffron, and 100 pounds of almonds, in addition to other spices, napkins, and linens. Medieval English King Henry V held a Christmas feast which included wild boar, prawns, sturgeon, crayfish, roasted meats, eels, and dates in a spiced cream. Another medieval English king, Henry III, held a Christmas feast which was noted as including 40 salmon along with heaps of boar meat, venison, and lamprey. Now we shall leave the castles of royalty and visit Christmas feasts of medieval English nobility and wealthy medieval English households. Medieval rich and nobility Christmas dinners. When you were given the special invitation to attend a Christmas feast at a noble English manor, you would notice a few items of interest upon arriving. At first, you would admire the wonderfully decorated holly and ivy-covered Great Hall and its stately high wooden beams. Then you would marvel at fascinating displays made from expensive sugar and wax to resemble animals, castles, and angels. Suddenly, a hearty smile would curl your lips as you approached the delicious smells where the grand feast would be held. Neatly arranged at huge dining tables were the eating utensils for fortunate guests. Each person would have a knife, spoon, and a large pewter plate known as a trencher, which would hold your meats. You would share a finger bowl for washing your hands with your dinner partner, since everything except liquids were eaten with your hands. There would be another bowl for liquids, which were mainly soups, broths, and weak stews, which would be your first course. The expensive item of salt would also be in a small bowl to flavor your dishes. In medieval times, people believed it was better to ease your digestion into heavier dishes. Therefore, the second course would be a heartier stew containing vegetables like leeks. It was with the third course one would see meat dishes. For the special Christmas occasion, these choices of meats would be of finer quality than those presented at regular meals. The kinds of meat on offer would be wonderful. Oftentimes, these foods were prepared to appear as if still alive. To achieve this, meat was skinned and roasted over large fires on spits, then another skin was sewn onto the prepared meat. When served, it would seem as if people were eating contents from inside the animal, which were usually stuffed with other foods. The exotic peacock would be the fanciest of these prepared birds because of their beautiful feathers when reattached to the prepared meat. Peacock and swan were the highest choices of bird for the upper classes, and both were prepared in this elaborate manner. However, the rare offering of swan would first require the king's permission to be granted before it could be obtained. Various kinds of special meats would be presented for Christmas festivities. These included woodcocks, legs of mutton, lamb, capon, suckling pig, veal, lark, crane, goose, and venison. They would be covered in butter and saffron to make an appetizing golden color when served to guests. Expensive imported spices like cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, and pepper would also flavor these meat offerings. Sauces, thickened with breadcrumbs, were added to many dishes containing ingredients like wine, herb, and spices. A special type of pork would often be served for the traditional Yuletide feast in wealthy medieval English households. The boar was a highly prized target of medieval hunts because it was difficult to capture and kill. At Christmas feasts, the roasted boar's head, prepared some weeks before its presentation, would be a delicacy. To prepare, its skin would be stuffed with bacon, roasted meat, and spices in alternating layers before being sealed. Afterwards, it would be wrapped in cloth and boiled in a layer of carrots, parsnips, and onions. Next, after cooling overnight, the boar's head was covered in warm lard and black ash to appear as fur, and rosemary sprigs were added for tusks. Then, it was served on a large platter. Boar's head would often be served in thick slices with boar's brawn. Brawn was considered a choice cut of meat in medieval times. It was rich, fatty, and dark in texture. To prepare, the meat was first deboned, then wrapped in string and softened by boiling. Afterwards, it was drained, cooled, and preserved in cider, ale, or wine, ready for serving. Fish such as herring, trout, and salmon would be on offer at these special Christmas feasts. Seafood would also be available like eels, oysters, and crabs. Various kinds of large decorated or plain Christmas pies would also be available for eating. The ingredients inside could be apples, pears, meats, or cheeses, with the pie's shape often taking the form of these contents. These ingredients were pre-cooked, then heated in the pastry oven before being served to guests. The pastry was not usually eaten, and the pies would be served either open-faced or closed. Various types of bread would also be on offer. Medieval rich Christmas desserts. Desserts for the upper classes at Christmas consisted of pastries, nuts, custards, tarts, and exotic candied fruits like oranges, dates, almonds, and figs. Desserts would often be accompanied with a spiced wine. Mince pies were another Christmas dessert available in wealthy medieval English households. Small and rectangular in shape, these were flavored with spices such as cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg to represent the gifts of the three wise men. These medieval pies were made with spices, fruits, and shredded meat. For those that appreciated a good mince pie, it was considered lucky to eat one on each of the 12 days of Christmas. Medieval English plum pottages consisted of flour, eggs, milk, butter, suet, breadcrumbs, treacle, and dried fruit. Its consistency was more like a pottage and was served near the beginning of meals in medieval times. Medieval rich Christmas drinks. Wine was the alcoholic drink of choice for medieval English royalty and noble households, with great quantities imported mainly from French vineyards. Red or white varieties of a young vintage were consumed from a cup shared with one's dinner partner. Sugar or honey were often added as a sweetener. Compared to modern wines, the alcohol content was lower. Cider would also be available, as was ale, though ale was frowned upon by wealthy English households. During medieval times in England, wealthy households would indulge in displays of their vast riches through generous hospitality, fancy displays, and great feasts. The grandness of these banquets, usually held in the great hall of their manor or castle, was limited only by the resources of the host. In many instances, Christmas for the upper classes was a time of year when they showed goodwill to those less fortunate. This is a lesson of a medieval, rich English Christmas feast that we should continue to remember for years to come. Thank you for supporting us at Medieval to Modern. Please be sure to watch our next episode or one shown at the end of this video. Also, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and spread the word about this channel so we can create more exciting content. I wish you good tidings as we remember that sharing knowledge has been a noble deed throughout the ages.